is one of the most researched and studied relics in church history, and profoundly impacts many who encounter its mystery.
As a person of faith, looking at it through the eyes of faith, I don't think it can help but touch your heart.
Something that we can look on not only to bolster our faith in those moments of weakness, but also to deepen our faith and our appreciation, our intimacy with Christ.
Join Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry as they examine the science of the shroud through the lens of faith.
Really interesting scientific information that we didn't know about, like the pollen from all the different regions of the world. As the shroud traveled around, it picked that up. Some of the mites, things like that was really interesting to me. I mean, this made you really want to believe it a lot more.
It's impressive. Like, humanly, I don't think like that is another level of love. It's not I'm gonna see people like, oh, I love you, I'll give you a chocolate. No. I'm giving you more than my life. I'm giving you my suffering.
Asking both experts and disciples, who do you say I am?
As far as who the man of the shroud is, as a person of faith and kind of reviewing the evidence there, it seems that a convincing argument can be made that it's Jesus of Nazareth.
Visit patchworkheart.org/shroud to learn more and get exclusive behind-the-scenes updates for your support.
The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. My name is Anne DeSantis. I'm the Executive Director, joined by our President, Nikki Kelly. This is our Beatitudes Series, and we're actually already on the sixth Beatitude. On this evening's podcast, we're going to talk about Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Welcome, Mickey. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Anne. It's hard to believe that we are very soon in the home stretch with this series. So, yeah,
it's a great series because the Beatitudes, as it says now, I'm reading this right from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Life in Christ, at chapter 1. The dignity of the human person, the Beatitudes are at the heart of Jesus' preaching. They take up the promises made to the chosen people since Abraham. Beatitudes fulfill the promises by ordering them no longer merely to the possession of a territory, but to the kingdom of heaven. And I thought, just for the sake of anyone who's listening to this for the first time, let me read off all of the Beatitudes just so that we can have knowledge of where this one belongs in the mix. So, first one is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So let's go back to the one that we're speaking of tonight. It's blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I didn't know if, Mickey, you had any thoughts on that Beatitude.
Well, I think it's kind of a challenge to be pure of heart, clean of, well, also the other translation of it will be clean of heart. But of course, they kind of are synonyms at this point. I would say that what really jumps out to me is that I don't think, let's face it, I don't think everyone's going to have a clean heart these days, but the only way we can have a clean heart is when God perfects it, when we rely on him. And some of the things that I think we might touch on would be issues such as chastity. So, we want to save ourselves from marriage, and even practice that virtue, whether we are a priest, religious, brother, whatever the case is. It's just not for couples in love. It's also for the clergy and the religious, because they take a vow of chastity, and most of it goes way back to the early times in the church. So I'm really looking forward to what this unfolds, because there's a deeper meaning to it, and we're actually going to unpack that this evening.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, we live in a culture, I think, as well. I mean, when I think of blessed are the pure in heart, is that a lot of our comedy, a lot of our satire, a lot of our sarcasm, conversations that we and others have, um, I sometimes think that we're not always as a people pure of heart, are we? Because we do have knowledge of the evil of the world. And I think when I think of pure of heart, I do think of someone who it's not so much a person who doesn't or hasn't ever seen sin, but it's a person who guards themselves, right, against the things of the world, the flesh and the devil, right? And able to still keep themselves and walking with the Lord every day, and not to become like this cynical person, this sarcastically cynical person about everything that's happening in the world. I don't know if you would agree with that, Mickey.
No, I agree. I agree, Anne, because I think at this time of the recording, we, of course, with the taping of this podcast episode, we just had the recent phenomenon surrounding the Oscars. I think, well, of course, the viewings are plummeting, left and year after year, and I don't have to speculate why, but honestly, if we look at some of I was gonna say too, and one of the things that you mentioned, of course, you have the comedy, the satire, and everything. They're not like the stuff today is not compared to what Mel Brooks had and some of the legendary people of the golden era of Hollywood. And unfortunately, in our entertainment these days, they have to find ways to propagate their message to especially the young people. When we look at the things that have been happening, as far as the LGBT rights and transgender, whatever the case is. And one of the things that we really have to understand is that let's face it, St. James, in his letter, he talks about how the tongue can be very hurtful. It's one thing that you think like, oh, a gun or a sword or that pierce you, that would hurt. But one of the things that St. James really reminds us, and I had to reflect on this for one of my penances recently. And St. James talks about how the tongue can be, he uses the metaphor of the boat and how it's steered like in this direction and that direction. And that's the same thing with the tongue. We could use, and of course, let's face it, speech is a gift from God for sure. The problem is we don't use it properly. And if we look at, sometimes these comedians, they go like whether on late night or I would guarantee, especially some of the people that I would even drop a few extra dollars to see in the first place. But we have to really watch what we say, because they can be very hurtful. Because, sticks and stones may not break our bones, words do, as the expression goes. And even St. James in his letter even reminds us of the dangers of gossiping and, insulting people, even saying, even saying things that, hurt people's feelings. And of course, I've been having encounters with this from time to time, whether directly or indirectly. And I'm really glad that we're really bringing this up, this evening with this beatitude.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, because I just think we live in a world, and I'm glad you brought up some of the things that happen in the media and in current events and in entertainment, because unfortunately, sometimes those images have more power than even the church with some people. And so when they see something on television or something in the media, and there's a debate about it, like there has been, as you brought up with some examples there, it really makes people think, what is gossip, bullying, hurting someone with your words or physically? Let's examine that. Let's examine that this is not a person, or we're not living that way, or we're not being pure in heart if we're living that way, right? If we're doing these things, that isn't being pure of heart. And so I just appreciate that you brought that up. Now, I found an article online I thought would be something we could bring up, talk about a little bit. It's from CatholicCulture.org, and it's a good article on this exact topic of blessed are the pure of heart. It says that in the Beatitudes, Christ offers us a perfect model for true Christian living, even more than the Ten Commandments themselves. They're a charter for the high moral calling Christ sets for his disciples. And it just goes on to say that blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The one line from the Beatitudes offers a more sublime beginning point to our reflection. It tells us about God, ourselves, and our ultimate goal. A pure heart is blessed or happy. Seeing God and being with him forever in heaven is God's plan for our eternal well-being. The Old Testament teaches that this purity is required if we are to approach God. Who shall ascend the mountain to the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false. That's from Psalm 24, 3 and 4. And I didn't know, Mickey, as a person in your 30s who's grown up a little more in the modern world, certainly than I have, right? Since I'm a little bit older. Do you think that this whole idea, this beatitude, is one that deeply affects people in your age group and even younger? Because there is so much temptation with this, isn't there?
Well, and I mean, the point I made earlier, let's face it. I mean, you look at today, I mean, you think that the whole gossiping and the bullying is just like like high school. But how often do we see people like people around my age range that still engage in the gossip and the bullying and probably don't have any thought whatsoever on morality? I mean, we see it a lot of times, social media too. Don't get me wrong about social media. I think it's one of the most incredible one of the most incredible inventions ever. We can network with people that are just like share the same view as us, and you and I have networked with people from mostly across the US, and maybe here and there we might have connected with people like our neighbor to the north in Canada. But to go back to my point, we are still seeing it. And there's even an alarming statistic that much of this is leading to suicide among people from the year of 10 to up to about 40 years old. And they don't have to be serving combat whatsoever, but there are people that are committing suicide because they are bullied by, whether it's someone from school, a complete stranger who has no thinking process whatsoever, or don't have a thought, a clear thought in the world. And it's very sad that our culture is really still thinking that, or it still says you may be this, but there are people out there saying you're not good enough. You don't look like, you're supposed to look like this, you're supposed to look like that. Oh, I wish you had put a few more pounds, or whatever the case is. That to me, this says a lot about a lot of what these people are saying, because what it is, it's all about character assassination. And I am really appalled. I'm very infuriated that we still have to be talking about this, especially with people that are in their 30s who don't even know how to grow up. And I honestly think that, number one, they're insecure. And two, they don't probably know what love was. They never were given that unconditional love when they were growing up. So they thought, you know what? I never got unconditional love, and I'm going to be spreading hate in disguise of love. And sadly, that's something we need to reclaim in our culture. You see these things from the LGBT community, love is love, love wins. Well, let me tell you something. Love will win when you see the good in the person. You don't care about what their body image is. You don't care about, how they look, how tall they are, how thin, how fat, whatever the case is. God made each and every one of us unique. We were knitted in the womb, as the prophet Jeremiah reminded us, because we were wonderfully made, as the Psalms reminds us. Because God is the author of life. No one can take it away from him.
I love how you express that, because, we are physical beings, right? I mean, we're body, mind, and spirit. But at the same time, we never want to become obsessed about that physical reality, right? So you look at somebody, as you said, it doesn't matter if that person is thin, heavy set, blonde hair, dark hair, curly hair, kinky hair, whatever it is, whatever nationality, whatever mannerisms they have, the way that they behave. We should be paying attention to them as a person and what they're saying to us, what they're communicating to us, how they're trying to express themselves, and try to put any judgment that we have aside about people's looks or anything else that has to do with their physical presence. So I think that's a good point that you made, that as Catholics and as Christians, we're looking at the heart, aren't we? Aren't we looking at the heart and the soul of the person that we're talking to, and not focusing on the outward appearance? I mean, of course, the outward appearance is going to be right in front of our face, and for us to look in someone's eyes and pay attention, but we don't want to have that judgment, as you said, about anyone in any way that in that particular area, in terms of the way someone appears to us. I also want to go back to that article, if I could. This is from the Catholic Culture again. It says, to be pure in heart implies that our love is wholly directed toward the good of the other person. We are, quote, single-hearted and not divided in our love. Israel's first and most important commandment is to love God with our whole heart, mind, and soul. That's from Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5. Jesus said definitively that we must also love our neighbor as ourselves, and that's in Mark 12, 29 to 31. This pure love, as demanding as it may be, is the high density to which we are called as children of the Father. Is it possible to fulfill such love? Yes, it is possible, because God has first loved us. And that's from 1 John 4 to 10. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we're called to the happiness that comes from a clean and undivided heart. So I think it's good for us to note that having that pure heart, we first have to love God with all our hearts, don't we? Because if we start to worship things of this world, whether they're people, places, things, whatever they are, then we are not going to be pure in heart, because we have to love God and put him and his will for us, and for others, they can follow that path, but for ourselves, we need to follow God, because he is leading us through this life. And if we want to be pure of heart, then we have to follow him. I think you would agree on that one.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, I think honestly, you mentioned the point about learning to love God over earthly things. Because I remember, recently we were at the Man Up Philly conference, and Deacon Howard Brooks Sivers reflected on the prophet Daniel when he talked about the Babylonian exile, when everyone replaced God with comfort and earthly pagans. And unfortunately, what happens? Well, you had war, you had conquest from Nebuchadnezzar, and this civilization, fell apart. And I think we're also seeing so many things unfold, not just here in the United States, but other places. And I think what these things are telling us is that we really have to turn our hearts, our minds, and even our well-being back to God. Because honestly, it's one thing you're physically fit. You're doing your self-care, mentally. I am for that, for sure. But some people are lacking the spiritual health they need. That is the lack of receiving the sacraments, the lack of they decide, I'm just going to skip prayer and just, and of course that one day of skipping prayer turns into 2 days of skipping prayer. You see, penance is a daily thing. It's not just like, oh, it's like you go to confession on the first Saturday or once a week or whatever, and you're like, okay, whatever. The thing is, especially at the time of this recording, we concluded the season of Lent. We're right now in the middle of Easter. One of the things that we really have to understand is that penance, well, I should rather say repentance, is a daily act. It's not just a one and done thing. We really have to render our hearts to God. All heart, soul, body, mind to him, because he created us. Even our bodies, as St. Paul reminds us in the letter to in one of his letters, that bodies are a temple of God. And yes, we do have to take care of them for sure. So it's not just, being clean of heart, but of course, body, mind, and soul. That's what it entails for us to strive for holiness. And yes, we're going to have bumps along the road, but we are called to repentance. We are called to confess these sins and then walk back, then pick ourselves up. If Jesus can fall 3 times, yet still make it to Calvary, we too can pick ourselves up and continue our journey. It's not a cakewalk, I can assure you, but we have to fix our eyes on what matters. And that is our destination, heaven.
So well said. And it's a great reminder of also what it means to be pure in heart. So I just thank you for that, because you're right, it does involve our whole being, doesn't it? And with that said, I did want to bring up something that, since we are a foundation that focuses on families in crisis, and again, just a reminder to everybody that if you haven't gone to our website yet, please do check it out at nonnatus.org, because what we do is offer pastoral accompaniment for families in crisis. And one of those crises is addiction to pornography. And in this same article from CatholicCulture.org that I was reading, it talks about that. And it says here that daily there are challenges to this pure Christian love. For some months, representatives of our Catholic diocese, now, of course, this is from this article, have been working with leaders of other faith traditions to address the serious dangers represented by the steady increase of pornography in our culture. Pornography is not new, but it has become a kind of plague in our society, reaching epidemic proportions. It is being propagated more widely than ever. Well-begun magazines, it is widespread on the internet, television, movies, and videos, and now on cell phones and other handheld devices, many of which are marketed to children and youth. Pornography has become the secret entertainment of many people of all ages, walks of life, and economic backgrounds. Use of internet pornography is perhaps the fastest growing addiction in the world. So when we talk about purity of heart, of course, we can think about how pornography destroys that purity of heart. Now, it's never too late, right, Mickey? I mean, it's never too late for someone to turn away and say, you know what? I'm going to get help for this. I am going to find some professional help, and also maybe through a spiritual director, but through your own sacrifice of making a conscious decision to stay away from it. I didn't know if you wanted to share on that a little bit. Any thoughts or feelings that you have, that because as a man, of course, you understand that this is a problem.
And I think it's really great that you mentioned the issue of pornography. And it seems that there's a lot of men are scared of confessing that when they go to confession. And unfortunately, every time they continue to not make it known, they're very likely to do it again. And 2, it still severs the relationship between himself as well as Jesus. And that is why we are called to make a good confession. Even if you have to, when you do an examination of conscience, this is actually a suggestion for most of you who are listening to this. Write down everything. I don't care if it's been a week since you went to confession, a month, 6 months, a year, 15, 20, 30, whatever. The point of confession is you walk in there, and let's face it, if you need a reminder on what's the point of confession, I want you to look at the crucifix, because thousands of years ago, Jesus hung on that cross for you, me, and everyone, whether they are people striving for holiness, people that continue to walk in pleasantry of the world. He died for you. When he hung on that cross for hours, he thought of all of his children, those that were addicted to drugs, those who were addicted to alcohol, pornography, the women who will go inside the abortion facilities and throw away their child because of an inconvenience or because they never sought the proper help from real medical professionals, and people are willing to offer them a free ultrasound. To the Catholic politicians who claim to be Catholic, yet they promote gay marriage, abortion, among other things. He hung on that cross for you. He hung on that cross to remind you they took on all the sins of the flesh and of the whole world because he loved you unconditionally. And sadly, today, we are seeing the epidemic, as you mentioned, Anne, of the pornography, in which women are objectified. Marriages are falling apart because men don't value their wives that they should. And we need to reclaim that. Porn kills love. Porn must be defeated. Porn is a weapon of Satan that must be defeated.
Thank you for expressing it that way, because the only way that it will be defeated is through Christ, through our prayers, through our perseverance, right? And recognizing it. And some of the other things that you just said, we just came through the whole season of Lent, and now we're here in the Easter season celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And during the season of Lent, a lot of you have sacrificed some of those bad things that maybe you were involved with. I mean, I'm not sure who's listening right now, but maybe you are one of those people who has been tempted by pornography, or through not being pure of heart. It might not even be pornography. Maybe it's in some other way that you're not pure of heart. But I think certainly thinking about and recognizing that porn, as you said, it kills love. This article, again, just to finish off what I was expressing before, says that pornography perverts the beauty of intimate love proper to marriage, presenting images of the body in sexual acts for base pleasure, regarding other persons as objects to be used, manipulated, and sold. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, eclipsing the amount of money generated by professional sports. In this way, pornography distorts the proper meaning and purpose of our sexuality and does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, and that would be the actors, vendors, and consumers. It's a serious, serious sin. So I would also want to say, I know that when Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers came to Philadelphia to do the Man Up Catholic Men's Conference, my husband was there, Mickey was there, lots of other people were there. And one of the things I think that he expressed was that when a person participates in pornography in any way, that they are also participating in human trafficking. Now, people don't realize that, but I didn't know, Mickey, if you had any comments on that, because it is the truth. It is not just a pleasurable thing. This is participating in making human trafficking even worse.
Oh, absolutely, Ann. And honestly, Deacon Harold Brooks-Sivers, he really hit the nail on the head when he made that remark, because you may not even realize it. You are actually accessory to human trafficking. And there was also, there has been a lot of, I think in the past 5 years, there has been an uptick in law enforcement, whether they're on the local well, I should rather say the civic, state, or even the federal level that made these big, raids to arrest men, women involved in sex trafficking. And some of these girls are as young as, let's say, in their preteens. They call them tweens, so to speak. And it's really a sad thing that we have to come to this. And honestly, I don't think many people have been taught properly of the faith and some of the ramifications of sin, especially when it comes to the flesh. And honestly, I think catechists, clergy, we all need to step up our game and teach the next generation of Catholics to be more aware of the sins of the flesh, especially how to avert mortal sin and what constitutes mortal sin. Because you may not even realize it. Those are also, look at pornography, they're in a state of mortal sin. And that is something that must be confessed before you decide to receive Holy Communion. Because that's another weapon we have as Catholics. We don't just have the rosary to defeat Satan and his agenda for pornography, abortion, divorce, etc. We have the rosary. We even have the Eucharist. And even Deacon Howard Brooks Sivers made a point about that, during his talk as well, during the Man Up Philly conference. And we really have to utilize these weapons properly. Even the sacraments. And I can promise you, if every Catholic prayed the rosary, received communion, stood up against homosexuality, abortion, euthanasia, everything that are agents of the culture of death, this world would change overnight. And we need an army of those faithful Catholics to conquer Satan's world and his agenda.
Thank you for all of what you shared during that time, because you mentioned confession. And I think that was important to mention, that when we talk about pornography, that it is a mortal sin that needs to be taken to the foot of the cross and getting that sacramental confession. So thank you for all that you shared. In addition, just to finish off what I was sharing from this article from Catholic Culture, it says that those who treat others as objects might experience some passing pleasure, but they are not going to be happy. Chastity exists not to prevent happiness, but to allow happiness to mature and blossom. Chastity helps us to see people as they really are. It helps us to it helps to ground us in the truth. And so I think the virtue of chastity is like that opposite of when someone is not pure of heart, right? It's in other words, chastity is the answer, is what I guess I'm trying to express here. And the way that we become more chaste is it's really watching our eyes, our ears, our hands, our feet. I mean, being more careful and respectful of other human persons and of ourselves and of their state of life, your state of life, whether you're single, married, wherever you are, is just being mindful and careful about that respect for the human body, respect for others. And I think that when you invite God in the Holy Spirit, it will go in much better directions. And so on the topic of who we are, of this foundation, I mean, we're all about reaching out to you, people who are facing some kind of adversity. We say families in crisis, but it really is individuals and families in crisis, because individuals, obviously men and women, make up families. So you don't have to come to us as a full family unit. You can come to us as a person who's looking for help. And one of the ways that we offer that help is through a free pastoral consultation with one of our the religious order that we represent, which is the Mercedarian Friars. And you can learn more about the friars who we represent by going to orderofmercy.org. Maybe you or someone knows a young man or even a young woman who is looking to find out about vocations. So if you are, please do check that out, because our religious order, it's a beautiful order that our fourth charism of our vows is the willingness to give our lives for those who are in danger of losing their faith. And that's why Mickey and I are here. We're here for you to let you know that if you're in danger in some way of losing your faith, that you can reach out to our foundation at nonnatus.org and make your free pastoral consultation with us. So with that said, I don't know, Mickey, if you had any final thoughts before we end this podcast on the pure of heart.
I do want to offer a couple of takeaways, Anne, and I just like to say, first off, stop giving into the gossip. Even the Pope mentioned something about how dangerous it can be. That's one. The second takeaway for most of you is this. If any thought of looking at a woman as an object creeps into your head, I would suggest you pray a Hail Mary and ask for the Mother to purify your heart and your mind. That's two. One final thing. If you're aware of anyone in your family who has a pornography addiction, and by the way, women, there are some women with a pornography addiction. It's not just men. Direct them to sources by the Culture Project, Generation Life, even some videos of people who escape the porn industry. I can promise you, these people will be an excellent source for anyone with that porn addiction to break it and to get out of it. So overall, stop comparing yourself to others. Break the porn addiction. Most importantly, visit Jesus in the sacrament of reconciliation. If you haven't done so already, I suggest you do it now. And visit him and receive that sacrament frequently. And of course, the next time you have adoration, lay everything down at the foot of the cross or right in front of the monstrance. Lay it all out.
Amen. What beautiful advice, because the sacraments are meant to help and guide us and keep us close to Christ for our entire lives. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us on this podcast. We will be back again because we're not finished with the Beatitudes series, but be sure to subscribe, if you would, to our YouTube channel. We would really appreciate that, not only from you, but your friends. The name of our YouTube channel is Philly Nonnatus, Nonnatus. Same for our website, it's nonnatus.org. And I want to thank Mickey for being such an integral part of this podcast. God bless everyone, and we will see you next time on our podcast for the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. God bless.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com.
The Shroud of Turin is one of the most researched and studied relics in church history, and profoundly impacts many who encounter its mystery.
As a person of faith, looking at it through the eyes of faith, I don't think it can help but touch your heart.
Something that we can look on not only to bolster our faith in those moments of weakness, but also to deepen our faith and our appreciation, our intimacy with Christ.
Join Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry as they examine the science of the shroud through the lens of faith.
Really interesting scientific information that we didn't know about, like the pollens from all the different regions of the world. As the shroud traveled around, it picked that up. Some of the mites, things like that was really interesting to me. I mean, this made you really want to believe it a lot more.
It's impressive. Like humanly, I don't think like that is another level of love. It's not I'm like, oh, I love you, I'll give you a chocolate. No. I'm giving you more than my life. I'm giving you my suffering.
Asking both experts and disciples, who do you say I am?
As far as who the man of the shroud is, I, as a person of faith and kind of reviewing the evidence there, it seems that a convincing argument can be made that it's Jesus of Nazareth.
Visit patchworkheart.org/shroud to learn more and get exclusive behind-the-scenes updates for your support.